Chapter 2. Sarah and Silas. The bundle settled down into the Heap household and was called Jenna after Silas's mother. The youngest of the boys, Nico, was only 2 when Jenna arrived, and he soon forgot about his brother Septimus. The older boys slowly forgot too. They loved their little baby sister and brought home all kinds of treasures for her from their magic classes at school. Sarah and Silas, of course, could not forget Septimus. Silas blamed himself for leaving Sarah alone while he went out to fetch the baby's herbs from the physic woman. Sarah just blamed herself for everything. Although she could hardly remember what had happened that terrible day, Sarah knew she had tried to breathe life back into her baby and had failed. And she remembered watching the matron midwife wrapping her little Septimus from head to toe in bandages and then running for the door, shouting over her shoulder, "Dead!" Sarah remembered that all right. But Sarah soon loved her little baby girl as much as she had loved her Septimus. For a while she was afraid that someone would come and take Jenna away too. But as the months passed and Jenna grew into a chubby, gurgling baby, Sarah relaxed and almost stopped worrying. Until one day, when her best friend, Sally Mullen, arrived breathless on the doorstep. Sally Mullen was one of those people who knew everything that was going on in the castle. She was a small, busy woman with wispy ginger hair that was forever escaping from her somewhat grubby cook's hat. She had a pleasant brown face, a little chubby from finishing off too many cakes, and her clothes were generally covered in sprinkles of flour. Sally ran a small cafe down on the pontoon beside the river. The sign over the door announced, "The Sally Mullen Tea and Ale House, clean accommodation available, no riffraff." There were no secrets in Sally Mullen's cafe. Anything and anyone arriving at the castle by water was noticed and commented on, and most people coming to the castle did prefer to arrive by boat. No one apart from Silas liked the dark tracks through the forest that surrounded the castle. The forest still had a bad wolverine problem at night and was infested with carnivorous trees. Then there were the Wenden witches, who were always short of cash and had been known to set traps for the unwary traveler and leave them with little more than their shirt and socks. Sally Mullen's cafe was a busy, steaming hut perched precariously over the water. All shapes and sizes of boats would moor up at the cafe pontoon, and all sorts of people and animals would tumble out of them. Most decided to recover from their trip by having at least one of Sally's fierce spears and a slab of barley cake, and by telling the latest gossip. And anyone in the castle with half an hour to spare and a rumbling tummy would soon find themselves on the well-trodden path down to the port gate, past the riverside amenity rubbish dump, and along the pontoon to Sally Mullen's Tea and Ale House. Sally made it her business to see Sarah every week and keep her up to date with everything. In Sally's opinion, Sarah was much put up upon with 7 children to care for, not to mention Silas Heap, who did very little as far as she could see. Sally's stories usually involved people Sarah had never heard of and would never meet, but Sarah looked forward to Sally's visits all the same and enjoyed hearing about what was going on around her. However, this time what Sally had to tell her was different. This was more serious than everyday gossip, and this time it did involve Sarah. And for the first time ever, Sarah knew something about it that Sally did not. Sally swept in and closed the door conspiratorially behind her. "I've got some terrible news," she whispered. Sarah, who was trying to wipe breakfast from Jenna's face and everywhere else that the baby had sprayed it, and clean up after the new wolfhound puppy all at the same time, was not really listening. "Hello, Sally," she said. "There's a clean space here. Come and sit down. Cup of tea?" "Yes, please, Sarah. Can you believe this?" "What's that then, Sally?" asked Sarah, expecting to hear about the latest bad behavior in the cafe. The Queen is dead." "What?" gasped Sarah. She lifted Jenna out of her chair and took her over to the corner of the room where her baby basket was. Sarah laid Jenna down for a nap. She believed that babies should be kept well away from bad news. "Dead," repeated Sally unhappily. "No," gasped Sarah. "I don't believe it. She's just not well after her baby's birth. That's why she has not been seen since then." "That's what the custodian guards have been saying, isn't it?" asked Sally. "Well, yes," admitted Sarah, pouring out the tea, "but they are her bodyguards, so they must know. Though why the Queen has suddenly chosen to be guarded by such a bunch of thugs, I don't understand." Sally took the cup of tea that Sarah had placed in front of her. "Ta, lovely. Well, exactly." Sally lowered her voice and looked around as though expecting to find a custodian guard propped up in the corner. Not that she necessarily would have noticed one amid all the mess in the Heap's room. "They are a bunch of thugs. In fact, they are the ones who killed her." "Killed? She was killed?" exclaimed Sarah. "Shh! We'll see here." Sally pulled her chair closer to Sarah. "There's a story going around, and I have it from the horse's mouth." "Which horse would that be, then?" asked Sarah with a weary smile. "Only Madame Marcia." Looking triumphant, Sally sat back and folded her arms. "That's who." "What? How come you've been mixing with the extraordinary wizard? Did she drop by for a cup of tea?" "Almost. Terry Tarsal did. He had been up at the Wizard Tower delivering some really weird shoes that he had made for Madame Marcia. So, when he had stopped moaning about her taste in shoes and how much he hated snakes, he said that he had overheard Marcia talking to one of the other wizards. Endor, that little fat one, I think. Well, they said that the Queen had been shot by the custodian guards, one of their assassins." Sarah could not believe what she was hearing. "When?" she breathed. "Well, that is the really awful thing," whispered Sally excitedly. "They said she was shot on the day her baby was born, 6 whole months ago, and we knew nothing about it. It's terrible, terrible. And they shot Mr. Arthur, too, dead. That's how come Marcia took over." "Arthur's dead?" gasped Sarah. "I can't believe it. I really can't. We all thought he'd retired. Silas was his apprentice years ago. He was lovely." "Was he?" asked Sally vaguely, eager to get on with the story. "Well, that's not all, see, because Terry reckoned that Marcia had rescued the princess and had taken her away somewhere. Endor and Marcia were just chatting, really, wondering how she was getting along. But of course, when they realized Terry was there with the shoes, they stopped. Marcia was very rude to him, he said. He felt a bit strange afterward, and he reckoned she'd done a forget spell on him, but he'd nipped behind a pillar when he saw her muttering and it didn't take properly. He's really upset about that, as he can't remember whether she paid him for the shoes or not." Sally Mullen paused to draw a breath and gave a large gulp of tea. "The poor little princess. God help the little one. I wonder where she is now. Probably wasting away in some dungeon somewhere. Not like your little angel over there. How is she doing?" "Oh, she's just fine," said Sarah, who usually would have talked at length about Jenna's snuffles and new tooth and how she could sit up and hold her own cup now. But just as that moment, Sarah wanted to turn the attention away from Jenna, because Sarah had spent the last 6 months wondering who her baby really was. And now she knew. Jenna was, thought Sarah, surely she must be, the baby princess. For once, Sarah was glad to wave goodbye to Sally Mullen. She watched her bustle off down the corridor, and as Sarah closed the door behind her, she breathed a sigh of relief. Then she rushed over to Jenna's basket. Sarah lifted Jenna up and held her in her arms. Jenna smiled at Sarah and reached out to grab her charm necklace. "Well, little princess," murmured Sarah, "I always knew you were special, but I never dreamed you were our own princess." The baby's dark violet eyes met Sarah's gaze, and she looked solemnly at Sarah as if to say, "Well, now you know." Sarah gently laid Jenna back in her baby basket. Her head was spinning and her hands shook as she poured herself another cup of tea. She found it hard to believe all that she had heard. The Queen was dead, and Arthur too. Their Jenna was the heir to the castle, the princess. What was happening? Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon torn between gazing at Jenna, Princess Jenna, and worrying about what would happen to anyone if they found out where she was. Where was Silas when she needed him? Silas was enjoying a day's fishing with the boys. There was a small sandy beach in the bend of the river just along from the Ramblings. Silas was showing Nico and Jojo, the two youngest boys, how to tie their jam jars onto the end of a pole and dip them in the water. Jojo had already caught 3 tiddlers, but Nico kept dropping his and was getting upset. Silas picked Nico up and took him over to see Eric and Ed, the 5-year-old twins. Eric was daydreaming happily and dangling his foot in the warm, clear water. Ed was poking at something under a stone with a stick. It was a huge water beetle. Nico wailed and clung on tightly around Silas's neck. Sam, who was nearly 7, was a serious fisherman. He had been given a proper fishing rod for his last birthday, and there were 2 small silver fish laid out on a rock beside him. He was about to reel in another. Nico squealed with excitement. "Take him away, Dad. He'll frighten the fish," Sam said crossly. Silas tiptoed off with Nico and went to sit beside his oldest son, Simon. Simon had a fishing rod in one hand and a book in the other. It was Simon's ambition to be the extraordinary wizard, and he was busy reading all of Silas's old magic books. This one, Silas noticed, was called The Complete Fish Charmer. Silas was expected all of his boys to be some kind of wizard. It was in the family. Silas's aunt was a renowned white witch, and both Silas's father and uncle had been shapeshifters, which was a very specialized branch, and one that Silas hoped his boys would avoid, for successful shapeshifters became increasingly unstable as they grew older, sometimes unable to hold their own shape for more than a few minutes at a time. Silas's father had eventually disappeared into the forest as a tree, but no one knew which one, and it was one of the reasons why Silas enjoyed his walks through the forest. He would often address a remark to an untidy-looking tree in the hopes that it might be his father. Sarah Heap came from a warlock and wizard family. As a girl, Sarah had studied herbs and healing with Galen, the physic woman in the forest, which was where she had met Silas one day. Silas had been out looking for his father. He was lost and unhappy, and Sarah took him back with her to see Galen. Galen had helped Silas to understand that his father, as a shapeshifter, would have chosen his final destination as a tree many years ago and would now be truly happy. And Silas, too, for the first time in his life, realized he felt truly happy sitting next to Sarah by the physic woman's fire. When Sarah understood all she could about herbs and healing, she had said a fond goodbye to Galen and joined Silas in his room in the Ramblings, and there they had stayed ever since, squeezing in more and more children, while Silas happily gave up his apprenticeship and worked as a jobbing ordinary wizard to pay the bills. Sarah made herb tinctures on the kitchen table when she had a spare moment, which did not often happen. That evening, as Silas and the boys made their way up the beach steps to go back to the Ramblings, a large and menacing custodian guard dressed in black from head to toe barred their way. "Halt!" he barked. Nico started to cry. Silas stopped and told the boys to behave. "Papers!" shouted the guard. "Where are your papers?" Silas stared at him. "What papers?" he asked quietly, not wanting to cause trouble with 6 tired boys around him needing to go home for supper. "Your papers, wizard scum. The beach area is forbidden to all without the required papers," sneered the guard. Silas was shocked. If he had not been with the boys, he would have argued, but he had noticed the pistol that the guard was carrying. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know." The guard looked at them up and down, as if deciding what to do, but luckily for Silas, he had other people to go and terrorize. "Take your rabble out of here and don't come back," snapped the guard. "Stay where you belong." Silas hurried the shocked boys away up the steps and into the safety of the Ramblings. Sam dropped his fish and started to sob. There," said Silas. "It's all right." But Silas felt that things were most certainly not all right. What was going on? "Why did he call us wizard scum, Dad?" asked Simon. "Wizards are the best, aren't they?" "Yes," said Silas distractedly, "the best. But the trouble was," thought Silas, "that there was no hiding it if you were a wizard. All wizards, and only wizards, had them. Silas had them, Sarah had them, and all the boys except Nico and Jojo had them. And as soon as Nico and Jojo went to the magic class in school, they would have them too. Slowly but surely, until there was no mistaking it, A wizard child's eyes would turn green when he or she was exposed to magic learning. It had always been something to be proud of, until now, when suddenly it felt dangerous. That evening, when at long last all the children were asleep, Silas and Sarah talked late into the night. They talked about their princess and their wizard boys, and the changes that had overtaken the castle. They discussed escaping to the Marham marshes, or going into the forest and living with Galen. By the time dawn broke, and at last they fell asleep, Silas and Sarah had decided to do what the Heaps usually did, muddle through and hope for the best. And so, for the next 9.5 years, Silas and Sarah kept quiet. They locked and barred their door, they spoke to only their neighbors, and those they could trust, and when the magic classes were stopped at school, they taught the children magic at home in the evenings. And that is why 9.5 years later, all the Heaps, except one, had piercing green eyes.